Please be seated. And welcome to Dartmouth's Multi-Faith Baccalaureate service for the class of 2022. Congratulations, all of you graduates. If you haven't thought to do this yet, please silence your phone and any other electrical device. It's always a bummer when you're the one whose phone rings right at the worst moment. Also, we begin by acknowledging that this service is being held on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Abenaki people. And we pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and extend that respect to other Native people here today. And we pray that these words, well intended, may become actions well taken. The baccalaureate service itself seems to have originated in the early 15th century at Oxford University in England. You see, each graduate was obliged to deliver an oration or sermon in Latin to demonstrate his, and I mean his, worthiness to receive his degree or a bachelor, signified by crowning him with laurels. The service was, in effect, what we now call commencement, for after you orated and had been crowned with laurels, you were a bachelor, you had your degree. Like the historical baccalaureate service, we have maintained the tradition of inviting a few students to articulate some sense of knowledge or insight into the life of spirit that they have come to understand during their tenure at Dartmouth, each from his or her own experiences, sacred texts, or beliefs. And so thank you to our student speakers today. And thank you to our United Campus ministers and advisors who so faithfully walk with our students and have done so much, especially these past couple years with this pandemic. So thank you all for all you do for us and for our students. Today's service, however, is very different than 15th century Oxford, England. Very different even the service of the early years of Dartmouth. It's now multi-faith, multicultural. It's not watered down in attempting to please all, and so end up serving none. At least I truly hope not. Instead, today we celebrate the variety of religious and spiritual traditions that are now presented at Dartmouth. We celebrate what we hold in common while also recognizing each tradition's beautiful particularities. And I hope you will see that today. We don't expect everyone to be able to understand or affirm every aspect of this service. Many parts may be familiar, some will not. We do hope that by honoring the integrity of various religious traditions today, each participant will find both comfort and challenge. Not all religious traditions represented at Dartmouth are included in today's service, simply because if we did that, we'd be here all afternoon. But our goal is that over time, all the different beautiful varieties of religious and ethical experience here at Dartmouth do get a chance to be represented in this service. This is a time of celebration and worship when we pause as a college to give thanks for our graduates. We are honored to hear the music of the Rockapellas today, so thank you for being here, and to be inspired by our speaker, Dr. Christena Cleveland. It's quite the honor. And we also want you to know that immediately following the service today, there's some simple refreshments that you can grab a glass of lemonade or water or have a cookie before you have to go on to that next thing. We know it's a packed weekend, but we wanted to give you some nourishment as you went on your way. And so on behalf of the Tucker Center, the United Campus ministers, and Dartmouth College, we rejoice with all who have gathered here. We remember those who are absent but always present in our hearts. And we celebrate with gratitude that we have reached this sacred time and season. God bless all of you who are graduating, and to your families and friends who have supported you. God bless you through this journey. We celebrate you and we pray that you may be a blessing to this world that so desperately needs blessing. Suraj, a student leader of Shanti, the Hindu Student Association, will now offer the opening chant and prayer, followed by Dean Scott Brown, who will offer the in memoriam.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to thank Professor Prasad Jayanti and Reverend Vogel for this opportunity. I will be reciting the Garuda Dandakam, which is a poem written by Vedanta Deshikan, a great poet who lived in the 13th and 14th century. Centers around Garuda, who is an ardent devotee and steed of Lord Vishnu. Without further, and the significance of it is that anyone who chants it or hears its chanting prior to embarking on a long journey is, blessed with Garuda's devotion, protection, and blessings himself. So, yeah. Sriman Venkatanatharya Kavitarkiki Kesari Vedantacharya Vadyome Sannitattam Sadaridi Nama Pannaganattaya Vaikuntavasavardine Shruti Sindhu Sudotpada Mandaraya Garutmade Garudamakila Veda Nidadirudam Dvishat Pida Notkandita Kunda Vaikunta Pidi Krita Skandamite Swanidagati Prita Rudra Sukirti Stana Bogakado Vakuda Spuratkanda Kavrada Veda Vyadavepamana Vijihvadipakalpa Vishparyamana Spatavaatikaratna Rauchichararaji Nirajitam Kantikallo Ali Nirajitam Jaya Garuda Suparna Darvikarahara Deva Dipahara Harin Divokaspati Chipta Tambolidara Kina Kalpa Kalpantava Dula Kalpo Dayanalpa Veera Idotya Chamatkara Daityari Jaitra Tvajaroha Nirta Ridotkarsha Sankarshanatman Garutman Marutpanchakadisha Satyadimurte Nakaschit Samaste Namaste Punaste Namaha Nama idama jahatsa paryaya niryada bhaksha nilaspala notve lapado divichi chapeda hadakada pata lapamgara sangrita nagendra pita shruni bhava baswana kashrene chandatundaya nrityadbhujanga brive vajrane damshraya tubhyam adhyatma vidya videya bhavatta simapadaeta dayeda chame Manuranukada Pakshivatra Spurattarakas Tavakas Chitrabanu Priya Shekhar Asrayatamna Srivarga Bhavarga Prasodip Paravyomadhaman Valatveshidarpa Jwalat Valakilya Pratignavatirna Stiram Tattvabuddhim Param Bhaktidenum Jagan Mulakunte Mukunde Mahananda Dogdin Dadita Mudaka Mahinantaka Shatram Shadguna Charano Naraparibati Navina Kumbhagunaha Vishnu Radha Dandakoyam Vikadayatu Vipakshavahini Vyuham Vichitra Siddhitasoyam Venkatesha Vibashita Garuda Dvajoshaya Gito Garudandakaha Kavitarkikisimhaya Kalyana Gunashaline Srimate Venkateshaya Vedanta Gurave Namaha. Thank you. And one last closing note, it was taught to me actually back when I was in elementary school with my sister by my grandmother. So something that we have learned for a while, and it's nice to say. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Brown. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm honored to serve as the interim dean of the college. Each year during this special service, we hold sacred space and recognize and honor the families of students in the graduating class who passed away during their time at Dartmouth. The class of 22 lost Lamise Kareem, who died in April 2021, and we hold Lamise's family in our hearts as we honor her memory today. And in recognition that many of us here have experienced his losses this year, I'd also like us to grieve together for Lamise, as well as the family, friends, partners, co-workers, and others who have been important in our lives. If you could, please join me for a moment of silence for Lamise, her family and friends, and the family and friends of our graduating students who would otherwise be with us today. Thank you.
At this time, I invite Michael, active in Aquinas House, the Student Catholic Center, and then Archita, a member of this and student leader of Shanti, to share their reflections with us. Michael.
Good afternoon. So when I was reflecting on my time at Dartmouth and the lessons I learned through my relationships at the Aquinas House, I came across a verse from Scripture that I want to recite for you. It's from St. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. And St. Paul writes, "The Lord said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness.'" And when I read this verse, I thought it would be really appropriate for this weekend because we have been hearing and will continue hearing for the next 24 hours or so all about our great accomplishments, the many honors and awards that our class has won, the various incredible internships that people have done, and how we're going to be the next leaders of the world. And these things are true, but I think it's important to take some time to remember that we're also human, and that means that we all have weaknesses. We all have failure. And a lot of these things are the things that we tuck away, that we hide. They don't show up on our resumes. But I can remember just thinking for myself sometimes in my Dartmouth experience of this weakness, times when at Aquinas House, I remember my sophomore year, I volunteered to be a student mentor for a freshman that year. But I was so overwhelmed with all of my classes that I hardly ever saw the guy. He ended up doing great things at Dartmouth, which is pleasing for me, but that's something that I look back on and I regret. Or other times when I was simply foolish at thinking of Green Key and being so excited for all of the concerts and screaming the whole night long, and then waking up the next morning and remembering that I'm supposed to sing for Mass the next morning and had no voice. And so it's things like these that are valuable to remember, the times when we weren't always great. That there's a metaphor that Dartmouth students surely know very well, and it's the swimming duck metaphor. It's the idea that when you're looking at a duck as it glides across the surface of a lake, it looks so effortless, it looks beautiful and put together. But underneath the surface, everybody's kicking, their legs are flailing, just trying to keep going. And so I guess I want to invite you, as we finish our time at Dartmouth and move on into the next stage of our life, to abandon the duck syndrome and embrace our weaknesses and remember those words that the Lord said, that my grace is sufficient for you, that we don't need to hide all of our weaknesses or be ashamed and constantly be putting on this facade, but that we can embrace all of who we are, offer it all up to God, and in that way, we can be instruments of true power, of perfect power. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I just wanted to apologize for how I sound. I've been dealing with some allergies this week, but I'll try to carry it through. Okay, cool. Gurud Brahma, Gurud Vishnahu, Gurud Devo, Maheshwaraha, Gurud Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I cannot begin to count the number of times I have uttered those words, aloud or in my head. I have thought of them, chanted them, and even sung them after learning the shloka in music lessons at the age of 5. They are part of my daily morning prayer, most pujas and major ceremonies, and will continue to guide me throughout my life. As a Hindu, I have learned and heard many, many prayers and chants throughout the years, but this one seemed fitting to share today. Written in Sanskrit by a sage called Vyasa, the Gurud Stotram is one part of a larger work called the Skanda Purana, a text that has over 88,000 shlokas. The Guru Stotram can be translated as follows. The Guru, a remover of darkness, or who we can modernly refer to as a teacher, is Brahma, the Lord of creation. Guru is Vishnu, the Lord of protection, and Guru is Shiva, the Lord of destruction. Guru is the supreme almighty God that we bow to. To me, this verse means that teachers in our society deserve the utmost praise, respect, and admiration for leading us and helping us grow, something that I've always tried to uphold at Dartmouth. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't know most of the details about the Guru Stotram that I just mentioned and had to ask my dad and Google for those facts. However, despite my lack of some of the institutional knowledge about Hinduism, I feel very in touch with my religion, and this connection has grown throughout my time at Dartmouth. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, into what I would call a pretty religious family. I learned Indian classical dance and music, and almost all of the themes and messages from those musical pieces were devotional songs to Hindu gods. My parents were a part of a group of friends that conducted regular pujas every month at different people's homes, and we frequented the temple, especially on birthdays, holidays, and festivals. And many gods in Hinduism means that there are many festivals, so many temple visits. And we were also strict vegetarians. I didn't nearly expect my connection with my religion to grow at Dartmouth, but it did. Something about being away from home led me to desire more of a personal self-interest in my religion that I was raised in. Or it was just the convenience of being placed in the Wheeler dorms my freshman year, just so I could walk to Rollins Chapel to the Saraswati Temple on my way out of my dorm every morning. I met Professor Prasad Jayanthi, a CS professor at Dartmouth, early on in my freshman year, and I became accustomed to seeing Prasad Uncle, how I referred to him outside of Sudikoff, and his family every Friday. Yes, every Friday. Little did I know that the little northeastern town of Hanover, New Hampshire in the United States would have long Hindu pujas every Friday night. For me, these pujas became an escape from the Dartmouth bubble. Whether you could call them study breaks or dinner or even just a reminder of home, I can never qualify how much it meant to me to be sitting around with people of a similar background. Professor Jayanthi, the Saraswati Temple, and the Shanti Hindu Society all led me to help take the reins on my own religious journey. Hinduism became not what I had practiced or what I had been taught, but a way I chose to live. The temple at Dartmouth became a place I went to practice singing, to pray to pass my tests, and to feel at peace. I made friends at the temple, and our friendship was bolstered by attending Hindu events. I also learned to explore my religion and my culture in other areas on campus. My dance team and my a cappella group allowed me to share the devotional Hindu art forms I learned with my peers and friends. I invited friends of different backgrounds to stain their clothes and celebrate Holi with me, and I also ordered plenty of late-night Dominoes, but I always got my pizza uncut, just so I knew that there was no cross-contamination on the cutter, so I was completely eating a vegetarian pizza. Small but impactful, these experiences helped me embrace the religion I was. Dartmouth showed me that the culture my immigrant parents brought over from India about 30 years ago would not be lost, that the beliefs and morals of my ancestors could shine through in a little room in a big chapel at the basement or in the basement of the old CS department building. Dartmouth helped me fully realize the Guru Stotram and to grasp how important my professors, classers, and other educational pursuits were and how fortunate I was to explore them. Dartmouth has made me a better student, a more passionate individual, and most truly, but also most unexpectedly, a more devout Hindu. Thank you.
And now we invite the Rockapellas to come up and sing Babylon. Not in the program, but they're going to sing Babylon.
By the rivers of Babylon, where we sat down, and there we wept when we remembered Zion. For the wicked carried us away in captivity, required from us a song. How can we sing out our song in a strange sing out our song in a strange land.
Thank you, Rockapellas. And now I invite Kimberly, active in Agape Christian Fellowship and a resident at Edgerton House, the Episcopal Campus Ministry, and then Benjamin, active at both Chabad and Hillel student Jewish organizations, to give their reflections. Kimberly.
I like to think of myself as someone who lives in between the practical and the existential. Here at Dartmouth, I studied engineering and philosophy. One is much more practical, the other more existential. But I've often had trouble connecting these two things, especially when it comes to faith. I've tended to view faith as existential, telling us what we live for and why we exist. It was often a struggle to move from that abstract realm to the practical world in which we inhabit every day. It was really at Dartmouth when the two sides started coming together. In his letter to the Ephesians, the Apostle Paul makes use of the ancient Hebrew metaphor of walking, urging them to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. This metaphor of walking is a metaphor of living. It's describing the pilgrimage of our regular lives. And for someone like myself, who's a musician, that walk is better known as practice. Now, music straddles the existential and the practical. And as a violinist, I've experienced how it's both inexplicably transcendent and at the same time tangibly gritty and physical, especially when you're tired and just not getting it to sound good. And faith, I've come to realize, it's just like practice. Faith is just as messy, just as hard, and just as present in the everyday, even as it is deeper and wider than anything we could ever comprehend. It's the little things that we do over and over again that shape who we are, that we internalize the most. And I'm not just talking about living according to a set of rules. I'm talking about belief itself as a form of practice. Belief, as I've come to learn, isn't just a static ideology that we hold on to, but rather a journey that we walk. And that's what I found here at Dartmouth. I've had the privilege of walking the faith walk with incredible fellowships and with my church here. I've had transformative conversations that showed me it's not about which argument is better at the end of the day, but how to listen out of love. I've come to see that faith manifests itself in taking time out of my busy schedule to spend intentional time with others and with God. And I've realized how much I still don't know and how that's so okay. Living at the Edge, the student house of the Episcopal Campus Ministry, didn't just provide me with a space for theological conversations, but more importantly, a space to inhabit and to actually live in. The existential becomes a lot more practical when there's dirty dishes in the sink to deal with. So Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, also urges them and us to walk with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. These are not things that come naturally to us, but I now know that I am called to practice this, to live out my faith day by day, and to bring the most transcendent into the most mundane, and the most mundane into the most transcendent. This is where the existential meets the practical. And at the end of the day, they're really not that different. Thank you.
Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, u'masara liYehoshua, v'Yehoshua l'zkenim, u'zkenim l'nevi'im, u'nevi'im מסרה לאנשי כנסת הגדולה. הם אמרו 3 דברים, hayu metunim bedin, ve'emidu talmidim harbe, ve'asu seg b'Torah. I'll get into what all this means in a minute, but I want to start with a little bit of a story. By the time I arrived at Dartmouth, Judaism was an inseparable part of my identity. It was the way I woke up in the morning, it was how I ate my meals, and it was how I planned my weekends. Therefore, without second thought, the first place I ventured to when I arrived on campus was 19 Allen Street, the Chabad house. Little did I know how impactful that house would be in my experience at Dartmouth. I still remember that first lunch that I had there. I arrived a little early for freshman year trips. The sophomores had not yet fully left from their sophomore summer. And I met Rabbi Gray for the first time, as well as a good friend who would become maybe my best friend at Dartmouth, a 20, Jonathan Gliboff. For the next year, Jonathan, another Jewish observant student, and I would spend hundreds of hours together. We'd go on walks, we'd have tremendous conversations, we'd sing Zmirot, which are a series of very fun songs, and we'd sometimes even venture into the basement of Barry to study Talmud. I tell this story to illustrate how I feel about Judaism, and by extension, Chabad and Hillel. These two organizations perform exactly what I've always felt are the most important traits of Judaism. and what I believe the passage I read to you earlier perfectly emulates. That is the emphasis on the individual and the connections that we build between each other. If I were to continue to read the Pirkei Avot, which is where this passage comes from, we'd see that the majority of the first chapter is a delineation of a lineage, a passing of knowledge, a passing of Torah from generation to generation. At each iteration, it mentions an individual or sometimes a pair of individuals directly by name to whom the knowledge is passed to. These relationships are the ones that we cherish the most. Chabad and Hillel are two organizations that perfectly perform this relationship building. Through social as well as religious programming, Chabad and Hillel have fostered these eternal relationships. And I say eternal because I've seen them grow and I've seen them last after students have left. Now I'll get into what the passage that I read before actually means. There's two components. The first component highlights the individualistic nature of knowledge transfer, like I mentioned before. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moses received the Torah from Sinai, transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. I can't help but think about the one-on-one sessions I've had studying Pirkei Avot, Talmud, Tanakh with Rabbi Gray, or my dinners with Rabbi Seth, or even the office hours where I sit with my professor for hours talking about some obscure research that I never knew existed. Judaism emphasizes learning very similarly to how Dartmouth executes it. The second part highlights three components, three traits spoken by the Great Assembly. The first, that we should be fair at administering justice. This is a trait of the research process and of the liberal arts as a whole. Don't be quick to judge, meticulously gather data, consider opposing opinions, and make an informed decision. This is how Dartmouth taught me how to write when I arrived, and it's how Judaism encourages curiosity and inquiry. Second, that we should raise many disciples. Over the past 4 years, we have been of the many disciples at Dartmouth. Today, and more importantly tomorrow, mark when this advice transfers from Dartmouth's shoulders onto ours. We have learned so much over the past 4 years, and if there's one last thing to learn, I think, it's that we should and we can share what we've learned and raise disciples of our own. Lastly, the sages tell us to place fences around Torah. Torah is really synonymous with institutional teachings. How do you build a fence around a book? Therefore, I believe that we can read this passage as telling us to safeguard the source of our knowledge. Guard Dartmouth. Guard its principles and the institutions that surround it as well. As I hope you can see now, the principles that guide my faith are similar to those principles that I see in Dartmouth. As such, my faith has provided me with an alternative view of Dartmouth's goals. Dartmouth didn't just teach me how to write. It helped me take my Jewish critical nature and put it onto paper. Dartmouth didn't just teach me, but it helped me take my Dartmouth didn't just teach me, but it provided me with knowledge to teach others. Dartmouth didn't just integrate me into its ecosystem, but it built an ecosystem around me, which I now have the responsibility to maintain. Thank you, Bahatzlacha, to all of the seniors, and Mazal Tov on your graduation.
I have to say, as someone who researches the development of wisdom, it's an incredible gift to hear about the journeys of our students, and very much appreciate for the gifts that you shared with us today. And today, I'm also have the opportunity and thrilled to introduce our speaker, Dr. Christena Cleveland, who's in the Dartmouth class of 2003, who will talk about her own transformative journey and spiritual awakening. Theologian, social psychologist, and activist, Dr. Cleveland undertook a 400-mile pilgrimage in France to the ancient shrines of Black Madonnas. She describes the journey in her book, God is a Black Woman, and as a time of walking and thinking and a pilgrimage in the old sense of the word. She wandered and thought and followed a path through a metaphoric forest. And along the way, she found the well-loved Black Madonnas who guided her toward healing, self-compassion, liberation, and the sacred Black feminine. Dr. Cleveland holds a doctoral degree in social psychology from the University of California, Santa Barbara, as well as an honorary degree from the Virginia Theological Seminary. She is a Ford Foundation Fellow who held faculty positions at several institutions, most recently from Duke University's Divinity School. Her work integrates social science research and spirituality, and she founded the Center for Justice and Renewal to help justice advocates understand the social realities that maintain injustice, and at the same time helping to stimulate their spiritual imagination and capacity to resist and transform these realities. She also founded the sister organization, Sacred Folk, which creates resources to stimulate and support journeys toward liberation and healing. Here today to fuel your thoughts and your spiritual imagination, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Christena Cleveland, who will help us move ahead into, in her words, think and wonder and think. Dr. Cleveland.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Dean Brown. Oh, thank you to Michael, Archita, Kimberly, and Benjamin. Thank you for your wonderful reflections. They nourished my soul. Y'all are way more mystical and integrated than I was when I was in your seat. So thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to share this space with you. Let's start with some breathing and grounding. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm a little soft-spoken, which is strange because I'm a lion on the inside. But let's just start with some breathing, taking a deep breath, a full body breath. I remember this weekend 19 years ago, and I was being pulled in so many directions, and I had so many different emotions, joy and gratitude and fear and doubt, and I was managing my family, and I was managing my friends, and I was managing all of the different expectations, and so this is just a great time to sit and ground ourselves. And so if it feels comfortable and safe and accessible to you, you can close your eyes or soften your glance. Connecting with this earth that we sit on, maybe feeling the way that our feet, our shoes touch the grass, the way that our chairs are holding us and supporting us. And beneath that, this Mother Earth, this ancient Abenaki sacred land that's been holding us and supporting us while we've been here at Dartmouth. And taking a moment to feel the breeze on our cheeks or in our hair or on our skin. Noticing the way that the wind is always present with us, surrounding us, resourcing us, whether we notice it or not. Taking in a deep breath, and if it feels authentic to you, reminding yourself of this truth. I am enough. Breathing that in and receiving it like we receive the breath, and it nourishes every nook and cranny of our bodies. I am enough. There's no accomplishment that can add to that truth. There's no failure or vulnerability that can detract from that truth. I get to be here enough, just as I am. And taking another deep breath and moving your body in any way that feels good, getting comfortable for these next few moments of contemplation and reflection. If it feels good to you and you've been in your own world, you can come back to us. Welcome. I'm so glad to see all of your faces, and I'm going to commit, I think this is a faux pas. I'm going to start by sharing a story about an experience I had at another university. About I think this was in 2015, I got invited to speak at Howard Divinity School. Howard University is the great, historically Black college in DC. And I was invited to speak at their annual theology conference. And this was actually a pretty unique setup for a conference because they had millennials and Gen Zers running the ground game with social media and organization and administration of the conference, and they were collaborating with some elders, some faculty emeritus and older alums. And so it was kind of this intergenerational enterprise, and I was gonna co-keynote this event with an older alum. So I was really excited. I love intergenerational interaction. But the people who were organizing it told me the elders are going to be in charge of hospitality. So when you get to the airport, when you get to Reagan Airport, some folks will be there to pick you up. And so I said, okay, great, who's coming? And they said, Dr. Gay Wilmore will be picking you up. Now, you may not know who Gay Wilmore is, but he's basically the father of Black theology. And at the time, I think was like 94 years old. So I was like in awe that, first of all, I was going to get picked up from the airport, not an Uber, but like this incredible giant of theology who really transformed the way that we think about faith in the Christian tradition. He was one of the first people to say, no, actually, God is on the side of the oppressed. Actually, Jesus is Black. Jesus relates to the Black experience. And he was doing a lot of this work in the 40s and the 50s, a big part of the civil rights movement, the theological arm of the civil rights movement. So I was like, okay, this will be really interesting. I walk out of Reagan Airport, and he rolls up in a 1972 Lincoln, okay? If you don't know that car, it's like a small yacht. Okay, and so he rolls up, and he's with his two best friends who are also in their 90s. They've been friends for like 70 years, two civil rights lawyers and activists, and they all live together in the same retirement home, which is like retirement goals, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? And so they pick me up, and I'm just in awe of these like incredible activists and elders in my tradition. So I start asking them questions. And of course, they love that, a younger person is interested in their story. So they take me on this tour of Washington, D.C., and we're driving by all these landmarks, and they're telling me these stories that aren't known. So like we drive by this restaurant, they're like, oh yeah, remember that time that we were there with Malcolm X, okay? And we smeared barbecue sauce all over his shirt, so they're just telling me, and they were like, this is where we were doing a lot of the legislation for the Civil Rights Act of 1965, so we're just driving around. It's like a whole hour of just like this old school Black history tour of DC. Then eventually I'm like, okay, this has been super fun, but like I have to speak tomorrow and I have to figure out where my hotel is and everything. And they're like, oh yeah, for sure. So it didn't occur to them to get me a hotel room. So they actually had just reserved a room for me at their retirement home. Like I was their grandkid, And so I was down the hall from them, and we ate in the retirement home cafeteria. They were bragging about me to all of the orderlies and the nurses and all the folks as if I was their grandkid, and bragging. Yeah, it was so cute. And then we ended up just hanging out in the lounge, and they kept telling me stories. We ended up staying up till 2 a.m, just hearing stories about their lives, the efforts they were a part of, how their spirituality shifted and changed over the decades. And it was starting to get really late, and I love to guard my sleep when I'm speaking, and so I said, I do have to go to bed soon, but Dr. Wilmore, can I just ask you one question? And he said, sure. And I said, what was it like being the father of Black theology? How did you imagine that? How did you help us move beyond what we thought we knew about the divine? And he looked at me, and he had a twinkle in his eye and a tear rolled down his cheek, and he said, oh gosh, I'm not the father of Black theology. He said the mothers and the fathers and the parents of Black theology were our enslaved ancestors who, while standing in the fields, their backs broken and beaten, the white man's whip on their shoulder, declared, there is a balm in Gilead. This I know. This I know. And in that line, he quoted an ancient and sacred Negro spiritual. And it essentially amounts to, hope is real. Despite our reality, despite what they've told us about ourselves, despite the fact that they stole us and tried to kill us and are trying to kill us, there is a balm in Gilead. This I know. This I know. He said, those are the parents of Black theology. In that moment, this older and wiser theologian was trying to help me, a younger and dumber theologian, understand a very sacred truth about theology. Theology isn't done in academic halls. The best theology is not done in pulpits and lecterns like this one. The best theology is done on the ground among every type of person as they're working out their sacredness, as they're finding their way past disillusionment and hope, and as they're seeking an image of the divine that relates to their experience and stands with them and assures them that hope is real. By saying there is a balm in Gilead, this I know, they were forecasting what Martin Luther King Jr. would say. The arc of the universe is long, but it does bend towards justice. It does. And this deeper truth that Dr. Wilmore was inviting me into was that we are inherently capable of being theologians. It is our birthright to move through this world seeking out the sacred, asking questions that are beyond what we've been taught to ask, and finding ourselves in the divine. Those are the theologies that are going to move us forward into healing and hope and justice. But the interesting thing about theology and spirituality is that so many of us are not equipped. We don't have the tools to stimulate our own spiritual imaginations. We don't have the tools to say, yeah, what they're teaching me at the plantation church down the road, that Christ is white and that Christ is on the side of my oppressor and that Christ actually ordains all of this and supports all of this. Howard Thurman, another amazing civil rights era theologian, talks about how his grandmother, who was enslaved, would ask him to read the Bible to her because she did not know how to read. She was illiterate. And he would read through the New Testament, but when he got to the epistles of Paul, she would say, do not read that man to me. Do not read that man to me. Because the slave owners, the human traffickers, used Paul to justify their enslavement and degradation of Black people. So she said, please read Jesus. Jesus sounds like a liberator. That Paul guy is sketchy. Don't read Paul to me. And so my ancestors who had the audacity to claim a God that they had been taught was not theirs, to re-envision, to reimagine, to recreate a God that look like them and related to them, even though at church on the plantation they were told, you are nothing and God is far from you. Because God is with the oppressors. God looks like the oppressors, and we have scripture to back it up. Because we're just going to ignore Jesus and focus on some other teachings. And yet, they somehow found themselves in the divine and found hope in the midst of it. But as I ponder and look at my experience in the Christian tradition, I certainly wasn't taught to walk into institutional religious spaces and try on the ideas and see, does this bring me hope? Does this make me feel more sacred? Does this help me to see others as more sacred? No, I was taught that rigorous faith was certitude, was persistent belief, was believing what I had been taught without asking any questions. Just believe it. This is true. But my enslaved ancestors didn't do that. They said, we hear what you're saying, and no. We have another way. We often are not given tools to critically assess what we have been taught and our assumptions about who is sacred and what is profane, and whose life matters and whose doesn't really, and whose testimony is reliable and trustworthy and whose isn't. But that's not the case in some other areas of our lives. It was right here on this campus as I was a psychology and sociology double major, and in my sociology classes, I was invited to expand my sociological imagination. You might know that term if you took like Intro to Sociology. C. Wright Mills, a really famous sociologist, coined the term to help us understand the ways in which we have been influenced and programmed by the world around us, and to take note of the ways in which our social identities propel us or impede us in this social structure. So it was right here on this campus that I started to begin to be curious about what we now call intersectionality, the ways in which I have some identities that I would identify with oppressed groups, being Black, being female, but I have other identities that land more in the privileged group section, having parents who went to college, being able-bodied, being light-skinned within the Black community. And sociological imagination invites me to be critical about what I have learned about myself and my value and my sacredness, and to try on what society has taught me and ask myself, does this feel good in my sacred and wise body? Does this affirm the dignity and sacredness of other people? Does this propel me through society in ways in which are unjust towards others? Right here on this campus, I got to learn to ask those questions. But we often don't get that invitation in spiritual spaces. What have I inherited about God, about the divine, about what is sacred? I've been a vocational activist for about 12 years now, but it wasn't until the Black Lives Matter movement became a national conversation, and then a year or two later, when the #MeToo movement became a national conversation, that I began to really interrogate what I had passively been taught about the divine. And as I looked at the way that our society here in North America really struggled to affirm that Black lives, in fact, do matter, and when I looked at the way that our society in North America really struggled to affirm the wisdom and the trustworthiness of women's perspectives, I realized this is a society where Blackness and femaleness are not sacred. And I started to look, what have I been taught about God's social location? What if I apply my sociological imagination to the person of the divine that I've been taught about? And everywhere I look in society, Jesus is a white man. You can't escape it. Everywhere we go, whether we spend time in institutional spaces or not, God is a white man who's powerful and on the side of the powerful. And you can't even use a dollar bill in our society without seeing the words, "In God we trust," written below George Washington, a white, male, cis, slave-holding Christian man. It's implicit. It's everywhere. This white male God rules our theological and spiritual imaginations. And in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the midst of Me Too, I was like my enslaved ancestors in the sense that I was like, okay, what they have told me isn't working for me. I don't relate to this God. I don't feel safe with this God. I don't feel seen by this God. And so I said, I am surrounded by these images. I'm surrounded by this implicit assumption. I need to see an image of the divine that looks like me and relates to me as a Black woman. And so I searched high and low for such an image. And as someone who grew up Protestant, all I had to do was dip my toes into the waters of sort of rogue witchy Catholicism to find the Black Madonna. She was right there, but there was this like conspiracy to hide her. And I discovered that around the world, there are over 450 Black Madonna statues on almost every continent, and many of them are 2,000 years old, and they actually have much deeper roots and are connected to Kali of India, and are connected to Isis of ancient Egypt and Black Artemis of the ancient world. And they're in these tiny mountain villages around the world. And after learning about her and seeing her, I realized my questions about my sacredness, my audacity to hope, all of this is found in this image of a divine who looks like me and relates to me and empowers me. But I didn't want to just read books about her, even though I love books. I'm an academic. I wanted to see her. I wanted to stand before her in my Black female body to touch her and to touch my own head or my heart and say, I'm sacred too. The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice, and this image and this lineage of people for thousands of years who have pilgrimaged, walking just like me, to see you, to pray to you, to find themselves in you. There is a balm in Gilead. This I know. This I know. If I hadn't asked deeper questions about what I had been taught, both in church and outside of church, and on the dollar bill, and in the Supreme Court, and all the places where white male God reigns, I would never have found this truth that my ancestors were whispering to me, that Martin Luther King Jr. was whispering to me. Find that hope. Find the angle of the arc that does bend toward justice. Keep asking questions until you encounter a spirituality that affirms who you are and helps you to affirm who other people are. It is your birthright. It is our birthright to seek and to question and to wonder. These are the theologies and technologies, spiritual technologies that will carry us forward. And we each have a role to play in that. And everyone's journey looks different. For me, it meant finding myself in these beautiful images, these ancient images, in these tiny mountain villages all across France. And for you, I just can't wait to see what that looks like. Congratulations, class of 2022. Thank you.
And now the Rockapellas again to sing Ella's song.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until the killing of black men, black mother sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mother sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Struggling myself don't mean a whole lot. I've come to realize that teaching others just to stand up and fight is the only way our struggle survives. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh, don't you rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. I'm a woman who speaks in a voice, and I must be heard. At times I can be quite difficult. I bow to no man's word. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Oh, don't you rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Thank you, Rockapellas. And thank you, Dr. Cleveland. Thank you so much. As chaplain, I get to meet the most amazing students who are dedicated to growing in their understanding of what it means to be religious or spiritual or live a life of meaning and purpose. And each year, the chaplain is privileged to present to a few of these amazing graduating seniors the Chaplain's Award. This honor is given for exemplary service to the Tucker Center and to overall religious and spiritual life at Dartmouth. Having started in this role only last December, I've not had the pleasure of walking with the class of 2022 all 4 years, just the final few months. However, in these short months, 3 students have stood out to me for their service, not only to their particular religious community, but to the well-being of the Tucker Center and to students in general. And so I want to honor them today. I am pleased to present this year's Chaplain's Awards to Atia Khan, to Jacob Chen, and to Anush Khan. And so if you're here, please come forward. Please come forward if you're here. And while they're coming up, so Atia, this is for you. I just want to say just a few words of each of these young, lovely human beings. And I'm sure all the campus ministers are just, they have so many beautiful, beautiful students that they're lifting up and that they're congratulating as well. Atia has been involved in the Tucker Center for most of her time at Dartmouth. She was the student director for communications last year, and this year she's the student director for major events like this one. What I love about Atia is that she hung in there with Tucker even when there was no staff to hang in there with. And when I started last December, she was so eager to assist in any way to get things going again. And not only her eagerness, but her kindness has really helped Tucker greatly in this time of transition. So thank you, Atia. Jacob Chen has been active in Agape Christian Fellowship, and when I started was serving as their treasurer. And as their treasurer, he reached out to me with lots of questions, none of which I knew the answer to, being brand new. But he didn't give up on me, and so we hung in there and we learned together. And in that learning together, we actually realized how Tucker can best serve individual religious student groups. He, along with Atia, also helped in our search for an office manager. And Jacob, I really appreciate how when I've had questions and I've just been looking for feedback, you are always there to give me that feedback, so thank you. And this past year has been a real challenge without a Muslim advisor. And the Muslim students have really come together and worked really hard because so much has fallen on them to keep their group strong and engaged. And Anush, you were one of those students. You have been so faithful in your care for Al-Nur, for the Muslim Student Association, for the Muslim students on campus, for the Muslim prayer room, which has had a few challenges. And along with others, you have made sure that concerns as well as hopes were brought to my attention and together were acted upon. And so, again, we love all our students, and I just want to give you guys some limelight because you have been so instrumental in helping Tucker be strong in this time of transition. So thank you. Let's give it up for them. Thank you for your leadership. And so you may be seated, except for Atia now will give us closing reflections and a closing prayer. So thank you, Atia. And again, please join, just even if it's to wet your whistle for a little bit before you go to the next thing.
Thank you so much for coming out today. It means a lot to me and all the other people at the Tucker Center. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with the Tucker Center and what it's meant to me to have this space. Tomorrow, I will be done with my undergraduate education at Dartmouth. And during those 4 years, I've worked in a lot of places, gotten my hands dirty in a lot of places. But some of my most fulfilling time here has been at the Tucker Center. When I first began working here, it was my junior year, and I wasn't really that qualified for the job, but I got it. It worked out, I suppose. When I came here, I was at a crossroads with my faith as a Muslim woman. I came here in part to try to figure out how to understand faith as something that was my own, an individual pursuit, rather than a series of claims told to me by whoever would benefit most from it at that given time, rather than something that was used for political or cultural or traditional reasons. I wanted to figure out how to craft a relationship with faith and with God that was mine. I didn't anticipate that along this journey, I would learn so many other valuable skills as well. As I go on to start my young legal career in Boston, I have the Tucker Center to thank for guiding me spiritually, academically, and professionally. This space has been such a safe one for me. It has allowed me so much room for growth, passion, and to ask difficult questions. As this baccalaureate service concludes, I offer this prayer recited before you go on before you travel or go on a big journey in Islam. I remember hearing bits of this in the car as I grew up, so I'd like to share it with you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان الذي سخر لنا هذا وما كنا له مقرنين وإنا إلى ربنا لمنقلبون اللهم إنا نسألك في سفرنا هذا البر والتقوى ومن العامل ما ترضى اللهم هون علينا سفرنا هذا واطوي عنا بوده اللهم أنت الصاحب في السفر والخالفات في الأهل اللهم إني أعوذ بك من وثاء السفر وكعبنا المنظر وسوء المنقلب في المال والأهل. I'll translate a small portion of this, not the whole thing for you. O Allah, light this journey for us and make its distance easy for us. O Allah, you are our companion on the road and the one in whose care we leave our family. O Allah, I seek refuge in you from this journey's hardships and from the wicked sights in store and from finding our family and property in misfortune upon returning. I hope that as we all go forward, we are protected on our individual journeys. And remember above all that those journeys are our own, to craft, to follow, and occasionally to stray from. Thank you for joining us. And I hope all the graduates of the class of 2022 are guided by the people and choices they are faced with in whatever way brings them happiness and safety. Thank you so much for joining us today.